Thank you so much. And it's a real pleasure to be here today. I've been to some great sessions already this week. So today I'm going to be talking about the use of peer assessment to develop healthcare students' reflective writing, part of a fantastic working team to look at this issue in our healthcare courses. So basically, the reason this kind of came to be an area that we started looking into is because there's an expectation amongst regulatory bodies in healthcare that we are reflective practitioners. So we engage in revalidation processes every 3 years for the Nurse and Midwifery Council. Our General Medical Council colleagues engage in regular monitoring and updating of their practice, and as do our allied health professionals as well. So there's a real need for our clinicians to be really good reflective practitioners. However, when I joined the University of Brighton, I recognised with some colleagues that our students were struggling to develop their reflective writing skills, particularly around really the kind of depth of critical reflection. So most students were able to do the kind of first stage of descriptive writing, reporting. Some of them were starting to use a bit of literature maybe to critically explore some of the elements of reflective writing, but students were kind of struggling to get to those next stages, even in their final year of their nursing degree, where they do some quite large reflective assignments. So some colleagues and I kind of talked about this, and one of my colleagues who works in the School of Biomedical Sciences, she'd already started doing some creative ways to support students in developing their reflective writing through peer assessment. So she had them working in small groups, and they would do some peer assessment of each other's work to give some honest feedback on how they could develop their reflective writing skills. Sorry, just going back briefly. So we introduced this into the foundation degree for assistant practitioners and nursing associates, and we found it to be really, really effective. And students fed back that they felt more confident in doing reflective writing, that they trusted their peers to give them feedback, and that they understood reflective writing better from looking at their peers' work as well as their own work. So in that project, we did also ask them to self-assess and then peer assess two colleagues' work as well. So we wanted to take this the next step and look at the literature, more literature. We already had a few articles that we were using to support our work, but we wanted to do a more broad look. So I used this for my master's dissertation work. So I undertook a search, and we identified 10 articles that we synthesised. And the themes that came through those 10 articles were around, as you probably expect, professional development, feedback literacy, and development of reflective writing. So what we found when we introduced the project to the foundation degree students was there was a lot of discussion about how it really helped them to better understand their professional identity and their professional role. And there were some indications as well around role identities and also transition to when they then go up into the second year, or then in our nursing students, they're sort of third and then on to being a qualified practitioner. So that professional development theme really came through. And there was really strong links as well in the literature and our previous work around feedback literacy, so understanding how to give better feedback and how to bring that into their future professional practice as well, which is really great. And then, of course, development of reflective writing skills. So it's really interesting that this work does feed into 3 different areas of our students' roles. So I'm quite a practical person. So from this literature, I wanted to create quite a quick and easy user guide, so that if anyone was considering bringing peer assessment of reflective writing into their courses or their modules, there would be some steps that you could follow. And we're working on developing our search for publication at the moment. So hopefully at some point this year or next year, there'll be an article as well that can support this work from that scoping search. So literature told us that we should plan it quite well with the students, so in collaboration, so introducing the assessment task quite early on, and ideally scaffold it throughout the year. So for instance, for the nursing degree, for our revalidation next year, we're considering how we can introduce this in the first year and then scaffold it throughout the 3 years of the course, so that students become more confident and competent in their reflective writing. And also decide if you are solely going to use peer assessment, in which case it might be a formative assessment, or if you will also have an element of tutor feedback as well, where it could then be a summative task alongside peer feedback. So there are some choices, of course, in how you use this as an assessment task. So then introduce it to the students. So have an introductory workshop where you would go over the different models of reflection that they could use. We quite like to give in our students the choice of a range of reflective models, so they could kind of play with different ones and find what works for them. And over the 2 years of the foundation degree, they did actually try out 2 or 3 different reflective models so that they could find what worked for them in different situations. Talk to them as well and support them in developing understanding of giving and receiving feedback, and talking about constructive criticism and how to, not always be positive, to make sure that you do give some feedback that the students can use to develop their writing further. And then repeat that workshop each year if you are making it a spiral curriculum across the 2 or 3 years of their course. And then there's a really strong theme in the literature around co-construction of the assessment task, or the assessment tool or the rubric. So in your initial workshop meeting, supporting the students in creating the rubric together so that they really understand what it is that they're assessing when they look at each other's work, and to give them some confidence and competence in looking at that together, and looking at supporting them in identifying the levels of academia that they're at, for instance, level 4, level 5, level 6 or 7. So thinking about how you can support them in using that language in their rubric, and really deeply understanding how we are assessing work as lecturers, so they can bring some of that quality into their peer feedback. And then also you might develop that rubric over time. So they might have a skeleton of that rubric in year 1 at level 4, and then over time you build on that same rubric. So there are options, of course, there as well for scaffolding. And then there's a choice around submission format. So some of the literature discussed using a blog format, where students could log in to a blog while they're away on placements, because of course all of our healthcare students engage in placements away from university. And that was quite popular amongst students in terms of being able to remain within that community of practice. It enabled them to have touch-ins with their peers while they were out on placement and perhaps weren't seeing other students from the same university. So there was some really positive feedback around that engagement and identity and professional development. But there was quite significant feedback in terms of the lecturers noting that the professional language wasn't present in the blogs. Therefore, there was less indication of this style of peer assessment reflective writing actually improving students' reflective writing skills. So students weren't quite getting to that critical discussion or critical analysis stage. They were sort of focused more on the descriptive stages. So a fantastic option if you want to keep your students connected, if you want to support them with this community of practice, but perhaps you need to introduce an additional intervention to support the development of reflective writing skills, if you want to make that your aim. And also setting some ground rules around the language that they use, not being conversational, avoiding sort of overuse of emojis, that kind of thing. The other thing that was fed back as well was that students needed to be given time during their placement hours to engage in this activity. So again, there needs to be careful consideration if you are asking students to engage in a blog around what your expectations are and how they have the time to do that whilst they're out on clinical placement. But overall, it was seen to be a good way of keeping students connected. Then, of course, we've got the more traditional submission of a written assignment. So this was the more successful route for having critical feedback on developing reflective writing skills. It also enabled a more structured approach using where students more formally used a reflective cycle. So that was really popular. And because the students were back in university, it tended to also have some tutor supervision as well. So the lecturers tend to have a bit of oversight. When we did this project with the foundation degree students, the lecturer team would look at a sample, a bit like when you moderate your assignments, we would look at a sample for quality, and we would then give additional feedback to the sample of students that we looked at to demonstrate that we were looking at a sample of work. And we would then discuss with the students in a lecture, as well as follow up, how that went and what our findings were of that sample of work, which was really beneficial. On which note, the literature also recommended regrouping, so doing a session after the workshop to discuss the feedback and evaluate the project so far, and support the students in pulling out their learning in terms of their professional development, their feedback and reflective writing skills. So this has been a quick whistle stop, so I know I've only got 20 minutes. So I just thought it'd be really nice for us to have a quick go at adding some ideas to an assessment rubric together that we might be using for a level 5 peer assessment reflective writing. Sorry, please excuse my dog in the background. So I've got a link there to the Padlet, and I'll bring it up on the screen in a moment. But if you can add any comments that you might have that you think would be important to include in an assessment rubric for a level 5 assessment of a reflective writing piece, roughly around 500 words. So they're usually quite short pieces of reflection using a reflective model. So yeah, so have a go at adding a comment, if you don't mind, to the rubric. I did add the link to the chat box as well.
Yeah, Rebecca, I know you have not published yet, but is there any further information on this available? I'm interested in implementing something
Yes,
similar
absolutely. So one, you can email me and talk to me. I'd love that. I have included all the references for the 10 articles that we used for our scoping review, so that anyone interested could look at the original research that we've used. And obviously, if you email me, I'll happily have a chat about that as well. But sorry, I'll just put the thing back up. Yes, absolutely. Give us a 6 months. We're really hoping to get this published. So no comments on there yet. Hopefully a couple of you might be adding. So the things that we used as an example when we did the foundation degree would be use of literature to support their discussion at level 5. So we would ask students to include 3 to 5 references to their, so that's a comment, to their reflective accounts, so that they could demonstrate critical analysis of their experience. So they might perhaps include references from their regulatory body if they were talking about their professional role development, for example. Yeah. Oh, lovely. So how they feel for both the positive and constructive comments from the peers. Absolutely. So there would be something on the rubric around a little bit of safety, if you like. So you might include the expectation of the students in terms of what that feedback will look like, and putting some emphasis on the students to take some responsibility for that. So asking the students, what level of criticism are you comfortable with? And also ensuring that students don't only focus on the negative aspects of the work, ensuring that students do include some positive feedback as well. Generally, our experience of the foundation degree students was that they focus on the positives in the first year. And we asked them to do a star rating out of 5, and we didn't actually co-construct our rubric, so we've learned now that would have been a better way to do it, which is what we're keen to introduce for the nursing students in the future. So we asked them to give a star rating out of 5, and there was a lot of 5s being awarded, which probably isn't a surprise. We are quite generous to each other when we're quite junior, and we don't know what the expectations are. So over time there was more constructive feedback in the second year particularly, and we discussed that quite openly in the chat with the students. Brilliant. So yeah, so how could they improve their work in the future would definitely be something we'd ask them to look at in the rubric. So could there be at the end of their feedback, could there be 2 things to take forward, a bit like us doing our, at the University of Brighton, we use a 3+3 feedback on assignments with feedback and then feed forward. So the students could offer some feed forward on how students could develop in the future. Brilliant. Yeah, practice constructive feedback students, absolutely. So that's really that aim of that workshop before you introduce a student, while you're introducing the students to this intervention, and also afterwards, so that you can really discuss how critical constructive feedback can be used. Yeah, tone of voice, absolutely. It's a really good point. So this really came through in the literature around using a blog. So would they like to have academic tone feedback, or would they like to have more peer feeling conversational style feedback? So again, that's something that could be fed into the co-construction of the marking rubric, so that students can decide what kind of feedback they want. The other thing as well to consider that isn't in the literature, because I was specifically looking at written development of reflective writing, but another consideration, of course, would be that students could use a blog while they're on placement or when they return. But I didn't look at that literature because obviously we were focused on actual reflective writing skills. Yeah, good. So do reflection show ability to relate key concept to own experiences? That's a really good point. And that's something that we'd really like, students to consider feeding through in their rubric. Good. Yeah, so some really good points there. And it is, designing a rubric with students can be quite challenging, because of course we want to weave in our academic language, and we know we're desperate, aren't we, to weave in level 4, level 5 and level 6 marking criteria that we use. But it's about giving those students the opportunity to bring their own ideas as well to this opportunity. And this is as well why sometimes it would be a formative submission and formative feedback rather than summative. Outline how academic writing. Yeah, good. Yeah, so how academic writing and reflection are developed over the course of the degree. So it's showing really good scaffolding, so that can then support them when they do their level 6 work. Do reflections. Yeah, brilliant. So do reflections show ability to reflect on how they demonstrate the values inherent in their chosen profession. I absolutely love that. So again, we could ask, challenge the students to think about how they can demonstrate their values through their work. And again, that's where really sometimes the references come in as well, where, we might suggest that they include some references to their professional awarding body. Yeah, good. Also, how that understanding might have shifted. Yeah, so I love this comment, Claire, that you've added. So ability to relate key concepts to an experience, but also how that understanding might have shifted or deepened. So we really did see that with our foundation degree project, where ideas and their understanding of their healthcare role did change quite dramatically in the second year after they'd had 3 placements. And they were sort of, because they were apprentices, they were slightly more embedded in the team as more senior colleagues at that stage, and they really could reflect on how they'd deepened and changed quite dramatically. Yes, brilliant. So introduce and practice the writing styles for different audiences. Yeah, that's a really good point. And there could be a choice for the students. You could give them the choice of a blog or reflective writing, traditional writing.
About 2 minutes.
No, that's fine. So I'm happy I think we've got some really good comments there. I think we've had a really good discussion. So should were there many questions in the box that we could answer?
I think Alison wanted your email. Yeah, you just put it in, I think.
Oh, thank you. Awesome. So yes, I have added the 10 references there as well. So these are the 10 papers that we reviewed as part of the scoping search. But yeah, very happy. For more traditional style written reflections, we used a feature in Turnitin where you can do self and peer assessment, and that was amazing because students can submit anonymously, and then the Turnitin will automatically allocate each student 2 other students' papers to review, and they can give feedback within that feature. And you don't have to, as a lecturer, it's quite light touch. And like I say, then as part of the team, we then did a quality assurance review of a sample of the work. So that worked really well.